Good. Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome. First off, I'd like to say thank you for coming. I appreciate that kind of these times are strange, but it's really great to see everyone here. And thanks to Develop for hosting as well. It's really great to be back. So I have changed the title of this talk just a little bit, but it's Learning to Lead in Games, and the content is all the same. I am Adam Pearce. I'm the gameplay lead at a small indie studio called Glowmade. We're based in Guildford, and we're about 30 odd people strong. And recently we announced our partnership with Amazon Game Studios, which is really exciting. And we're working on kind of an unannounced project for them, but not that I can talk about that today, of course. And there's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. So what's this talk about? Really, this talk is about what I've learned from my first year of being a full-time lead, and some of the kind of processes and guidelines that I've used along the way. I've really been fortunate enough to have a gradual progression into kind of a leadership role, and I've done kind of a few different things to get there. And I've been lucky enough to really learn from a lot of amazing people and to have a lot of people that can catch me when I have, not done the right thing. But I kind of understand that this isn't the case for everyone. And really this talk sparked from having a lot of conversations with my kind of colleagues and peers and things who were in a similar situation to me, but weren't quite getting the balance right or didn't really know how to lead and kind of been thrown in the deep end. But more importantly, I think it's good for an industry for us to have an open and honest conversation about leadership in general. It's kind of something that I feel quite strongly about, and it's like there can be a lot of stigma behind it, to where a lead you need to be kind of like stern and mean and treat people like robots, where actually kind of in my last year of people management and some other stuff, I found the exact opposite. And also I feel like there's not a huge amount of resources out there for leading in games. When I first moved into like a people management role, I bought a load of books and I was like, how to lead. And, a lot of them were very like business focused, and actually they were quite rubbish. And they kind of talked about there was a lot of jargon and a lot of kind of like difficult sort of terms and stuff. And I didn't really kind of appreciate it. So what I really just want to do is provide an open, normal conversation about leadership in games that's not laden with business jargon, and just have an honest, open discussion, really. We are quite a unique industry with a lot of unique challenges, and we sit in a very emotional and creative space, and that can make leading quite different to anywhere else. And I'll happily chat with anyone after this about that. Bonus points if you fancy buying me a pint too. So just for clarity, this talk isn't, it's not a how-to guide. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the exact steps to be a better leader. That's probably impossible. But this talk is best suited for people who are just getting started in a lead role, or who are looking to go into a lead role and kind of have a good head start. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and basically I just would prefer other people not to do that, and you can learn from my mistakes. But hopefully for seasoned leaders out there are some nuggets of sort of information that you can take back, and if you take sort of one thing back to your sort of colleagues or back to your day-to-day, then I'll be happy. A few caveats. So we are an indie studio at Glowmade. Like I said, we're roughly 35 people strong, but we don't have any like middle management or anything like that. Everyone is hands-on in the game, including like directors and founders and things like that. So we are very much in the indie space. I have a bunch of experience in AAA as well. That's mostly where I spent my career, but a lot of this stuff skews to me being a lead in an independent studio. The other thing is we're still working on our game. We haven't shipped it yet, but we've had a lot of deliverables that we've sort of successfully met, and we're learning from each one. But maybe, when we ship this game, I'll come back and do a talk on how to not do it like this and ship games properly. But yeah, so I know this is on the coding track, but I've tried to generalize basically as much as possible where I can. I have been a lead programmer for most of my time, but I have been a producer too. So there's a lot of, I don't think it's all specific to code. So I've tried to generalize where I can, but there may be some things where you're like, well, that's obviously all code, but there shouldn't be. So who am I? So it's good to know kind of my journey and where I've been, because what I've picked up a lot of stuff from a lot of different sort of like roles and things. So predominantly I've been a gameplay programmer for most of my career at Criterion, EA, where I worked on many cancelled games, but as is the industry. But some of the most notable things that I worked on was Star Wars Battlefront VR, which was amazing, and Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was also really, really cool. But please don't talk to me about loot boxes. You'll be surprised at how many talks I've done and mentioned that I worked on Battlefront 2, and people have come up and said, oh, what about loot boxes? Anyway, so once we did Battlefront 2, I moved on to Battlefield 5, Firestorm, which was their sort of battle royale mode. This is where I kind of had my first foray into proper leadership. It was more of an organic role. I wasn't didn't have a title or anything like that, but I ran a sort of small 3-person team responsible for like weapons and loot and things like that. And talking to a lot of sort of support teams like UI and audio and things like that. So then actually after that, that was a really fun project. And then I moved into production. So I became a producer. I was producer for about 6 months on another really awesome project that was canned. And then I moved on to be the producer on the upcoming Need for Speed game that Criterion actually still working on. I think it got delayed this year, but I'm looking forward to that coming out. And so then I decided that I wanted to move to a smaller studio. And at the beginning of 2020, just before COVID hit, I moved to Glowmade, and they were lucky enough to take me as a senior programmer. So I actually moved back into programming, where I didn't spend too long, actually. 6 months down the line, I was promoted to lead programmer on this new exciting project that I can't talk about. And that's been really amazing. And so that's probably where most of my kind of like experiences have come from, being a bit of a producer and then doing lead programming as well. I'm actually now in a different role. I'm a gameplay lead, which is sort of more discipline agnostic and kind of just looking after gameplay as a whole, which is also really cool. So yeah, for me, it's been a gradual progression. You can kind of see where I've been. And I definitely wouldn't be as comfortable in the position that I'm in as I am now if I hadn't been on this journey. And like I said, I don't think everyone gets to kind of jump around so much as I have, hence why I wanted to give this talk. So getting into it, I think the first thing that I find quite frustrating, and I think it's quite important, is to make sure that as a lead, you acknowledge your role. This is probably like my biggest frustration, but you know, you do get people who are like, oh, I never get time to do this. I just want to kind of make the game. I don't want to be in meetings and things like that. And to me, that's just not a great attitude. I think there's always going to be friction if you don't acknowledge your role. And sometimes people can go into lead and think it's going to be easy and, you know, like it's just going to be more money and I just kind of talk a bit more. But actually, it is a skill for people. And it's obvious when someone's not doing it right, and it's worth taking seriously. And generally, if you're fighting against your role, and this is the case in anything, if you're fighting against your role, then you're not setting yourself up to put the effort in or to enjoy it. And ultimately, you know, we're in games and we should be having fun sometimes. And this is probably quite counter to it. So what we do at Glowmade, and this is a really great exercise for anyone with a kind of complex role or don't have kind of very obvious boundaries, is to write out exactly what your role is and then share that with the rest of your team. Like just 3 bullet points is what we do. I've done it, and most of the sort of leads and other people in our studio have done it. And what it does is it really gives you an opportunity to crystallize exactly what the role means to you. You can kind of take thought and kind of figure out, you know, it's this, not this, and I don't want to be doing that. Is that part of my role? Because often those lines can be blurred between anyone. And so once you've got that, of course, share it with your colleagues and things like that. And then hopefully there can be no sort of confusion and no disagreement. The boundaries can be more obvious. Like I said, we've done that for kind of the last year, and it's been really useful to figure out where people's responsibilities lie. And I would recommend anyone doing that, really. So the first thing that I really want to talk about being a lead is that you have to get the balance right. And by balance, what I mean is the balance between sort of management, planning, and actually making the game. Usually as a lead, it's pretty kind of like the expectation is that you are working in the game as well. And that's not true for everyone, but I think it's pretty healthy for a lead to also be working on the game and being in the same headspace as your team. But really, if you're a lead, then you need to do that job first. So you need to lead first and then create second. If you spend all your time creating, then your team's going to be left out to dry. And ultimately, you've been made a lead because there's an agreement there that you're going to look after your team. And if your team is successful, then you're going to be successful too. So leading will always come first. But like I said, I think there is great value in you or a lead contributing directly to the game. You'll just be in your team's headspace. There'll be less overhead. You'll understand the problems that people are going to be having. And ultimately, you got to where you are because you're good at what you do, and you don't want to lose sight of that. I appreciate that that's kind of easier in smaller companies and where, like I said, no middle management, but I still think it's pretty useful. But the balance between these two things, leading and sort of management and then creating, can often swing one way or the other. And that can spiral out of control. And I know some people who sit in management like land forever and they never get time to do anything for themselves, or they completely sort of like shut off and just work on the game, and then their team is left high and dry. But I had a problem with this at the beginning, and now I kind of feel like I'm in a much better place with a much more balanced role. So I feel like there is a way out. So can you have your cake and eat it? I don't really like that phrase, because why would you not want to eat a cake? So one of the things that really helps, and it's kind of rule number one, is don't be the hero developer. I think there's often a misconception that as a lead, that you need to be everywhere at once. You need to be doing all the things. You need to be involved in everything and working twice as hard as everyone. And that's just not going to be sustainable. I'm definitely guilty of doing this, trying to do all the things, but it just doesn't work out. And more than likely, your time is going to be needed elsewhere, in a lot of other places. You're going to be stretching yourself pretty thin anyway. So what you definitely shouldn't do is give yourself the highest priority work. And this is kind of like a theme throughout the talk, is you should be able to trust your team to be able to do that stuff. You might be the most qualified person to do it. You might be, the person who has all the knowledge there. But really, if you take that kind of initial hit and you're going to be there to guide that person to do it, if you share out the work, then it's going to be far easier on you. So really the solution is to delegate. And the delegation also really helps to give your team a place to shine, like you don't want to be hovering over them, and they need to have opportunities to grow as well. So delegate the high-end risky work and don't stretch yourself too thin, and really just let your team help you. The other one, and this is a little boring, I guess, but they're forward thinking and organization. This is a bit like doing your homework, but at the beginning, it was a massive time sink for me to constantly planning meetings and figuring out what to do in the future. And it was very easy to do that stuff reactively. So kind of like when a sprint was about to be finished, I would think about the next one rather than do it in good time. And it takes up a lot of time and can really be quite draining. So it sounds pretty lame, and it's kind of like doing your homework, but don't do it on the bus, basically. Do some planning, little and often, and it can get easier and easier. It's quite useful to squirrel away some time, half an hour here, or even a morning with a nice hot drink, and sort of sit down and take time to plan for the future. It's kind of, what do you want to do for the next milestone? What's going to fall off this milestone that needs to be in the next? Like what do you want to do next sprint? Because ultimately, no one else is going to do that job for you. You own that area of whatever you're leading, and no one's going to come along and say, hey, you need to do that crucial part of your job. Maybe a producer will actually. But ultimately, you own a space, and it's far easier for you to come to planning meetings and to show things to your team than with kind of preparation. And again, this sounds boring, but if you come to a planning meeting and say, look, this thing's been on this bit of optimization or whatever has been on the slate for 3 months, it's far easier for someone to give up production time than it is for someone to be sprung on like last minute, no, we're going to need 2 programmers this sprint to do that instead. So if you make space for your discipline, it's way easier to push priorities, and it's generally more useful for the rest of your team. If every lead on your team came with their homework, then you'd have a half an hour, 15-minute meeting to figure out what priorities are. We're definitely still quite guilty of this. I've been in 2-hour planning sessions the morning of a sprint and things like that. It does happen, but like I said, it gets easier if you kind of take some time. So this is just a couple of things on how to start to get a good balance. And obviously there's not kind of one thing that's just going to make your life easier. But really, one of the biggest things that's going to free up your time and allow you to do other things, is to be able to trust your team to do the right thing. So what I mean by that is really micromanagement is a short-term solution. It can go on forever, and it can take up a lot of your time. And I really think it's another symptom of someone trying to be a hero and being everywhere at once. I think for lots of people, this can feel like the most natural way to lead. And I think everyone's natural instinct is always to be in control. And the misconception there can be that control means you have to be telling everyone what to do at all times. But that's not a long-term solution. And if we're talking about balance, micromanagement is the swing of all management and nothing else. If you continue to micromanage, your team becomes reliant on you, especially the more junior members in your team. And then you become the bottleneck for everything that they ever do. And then what you don't want to do is never take holiday or never be able to do anything else. So it's just not sustainable. So really, for a successful team, your team needs to be empowered and have autonomy over their work. And this is a bit like production 101. And I think if you ask a lot of games producers, like, how do you make a successful team? These 2 words will come up eventually. I don't really want to cover exactly all the kind of the reasonings behind this. There's a lot of resources that do kind of talk about motivations and things. But ultimately, if your team are empowered to make the right decisions and they feel like they can achieve that, then they're going to be more motivated to work on the game. And ultimately, that's the best kind of motivation, is the intrinsic motivation, which comes from the person themselves, rather than like external sources like money and pressure and things like that. If your team is empowered to make the right decisions, then they can achieve it themselves. And there's a lot of kind of jargon and not so good articles about why that's a good thing. But ultimately, it comes down to you needing to be able to trust your team. And that doesn't come for free. It takes a lot of work. It's a slow process, but it can really pay dividends further down the line. It just means that you're going to have more time and more balance in your role. But like I said, it can feel counter to your natural instinct, and you don't want to hover over people, but you want to give them space to grow. And everyone in a team really needs to be, everyone in the team involved needs to be working well. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. So one of the best ways to give your team space is use something that I don't know if this is the technical term, but I've called the review loop. And you've probably all been part of a loop like this before. It's pretty natural. It's pretty standard. Most people just go through it without kind of acknowledging it. However, a problem that I found early on was that I knew this was kind of a good thing to do. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward. But really what was happening was I was falling down at each step and not doing it correctly or in a good way. And then it kind of felt like I was going through the motions, and then really just kind of it fell down and I was questioning, is it worth us putting in a process when we don't really need it? But I do think it's worth keeping a structure like this. But like a lot of things, I think it's worth doing right. So what was I doing wrong? So firstly, and I think this is a really important step, is you need to be able to communicate the goal of your work and not the actual work itself. And what I mean by goal here is sort of really dig into the why. Like, why do you want something done? What's the purpose, and what's the benefit here? Often it's really easy to just sort of say, hey, we just need this feature. Can you make this feature? And if you do that, you kind of end up making a task list, and people end up just following lists of tasks. And it's really easy to lose sight on the actual purpose of the work, which means maybe they're going to do something that we don't need right now. Maybe it's not important. But if you're communicating the goal, you can always kind of refer to that and have that kind of like end goal in sight and say, okay, actually, this doesn't really benefit us right now. This was first taught to me by the GM of Criterion, Steve Cuss, who's really good. He does an amazing 2-hour workshop, which sounds really long, but it is good. But it's a really great way to just get across what you're kind of trying to do. And so communicating the goals is good for a few things. The firstly is you can ask yourself, is this work important right now? If you're asking yourself, why are you doing this? You can say, hey, do we actually need this? What is this going to give us in the long run? Which is far easier to do over features and things like that. I think for some people, when they find problems or things that need to be fixed, it's easy to instantly provide like a detail-oriented solution. But ultimately, sometimes if you take a bit of a step back, figure out what problem you're trying to solve, then you can end up with a better solution in the long run. Secondly, and this kind of links back into trusting your team, I think you can end up thinking in a higher level. You are ultimately a lead, you've got a ton of stuff to think about, and this is just but one problem in your kind of like suite of things. And so really what you can do is trust your team to think about the detail and the what and the how, and you can take a much higher level approach to your game and think about the game holistically. It's just better to offload a bit of brain space onto your teammates than trying to keep everything in. And ultimately, you've hired them to be the experts and to work on the details. Thirdly, it can clearly communicate what actually you're trying to do. Like I've said, if you give someone a feature, there are hundreds of different ways for someone to implement a feature or to do a piece of work. And if you are aligned on what the actual goal of that work is, you're much less likely to be disappointed because they didn't implement the health bar in the same way that's in your favorite game. They understand the goal of the work and not actually what you just wanted them to do. So often setting goals can reduce disappointment if you embrace it. But you do need to be open to the idea that it's not your way or the highway. I really think that games are much better when they're in a collaborative space and everyone's sort of contributing to that game and not just sort of like mindlessly making features. Often this is kind of how I'll get people to write like user stories and things for a sprint. And each time it's just it's great to just ask them why. I want to make so-and-so feature. Why are we doing that? What are we actually trying to achieve? What does the player want to do? Games are like incredibly iterative, and these kind of changes, like different features, how to implement features, they change all the time. And I feel like setting goals is a much better way to embrace that than to try and fight it. I will caveat this a bit with, you can go a bit too far down the rabbit hole and spend ages writing goals and things. And ultimately what you're trying to do is just make sure your team are aligned and doing the right thing. So often if you've been working with a team for a long time or you're all on the same page, you won't have to go into like super detailed goals. You can just crack on. It doesn't always lend itself to to every piece of work, but I think like more often than not, it's a useful way to think about things. Cool. So now you've got your goal and everyone's agreed upon that. And this is where you can kind of be hands off. You know, the work gets done. Actually, you're trusting your team. Ultimately, you can't be in every conversation. And this is going back to don't micromanage, because you can't. You can't be in every conversation and you can't be part of every sort of meeting that's there. What the best thing to do, of course, is delegate and to make sure that you're communicating with your team and not sort of being part of every conversation. What you don't want to do is confuse situations by making people explain the situation over and over again. Often you have to go on a bit of a journey to understand a lot of the problems, and you don't want your teammate to be explaining that twice or having to go on that journey twice. So it's better to not confuse situations. And the best thing that can help with this kind of trust is to make sure that your team are aligned. And by aligned is like, you know, you have to be on the same page. And kind of the best way to do this is create sort of alignment tools. And I don't really like that name, but it's just an umbrella term. We've already spoken about like sort of goals, and they're very much the why, but they sort of explicitly don't talk about the what or the how. And your team really needs to be able to reference sort of methodologies and principles and things like that to be able to do the right work and the work in the right way. So this is, what I would call alignment tools. And this is really just things like for coders, it would be coding standards or coding principles, go a bit further and sort of, really explain the kind of methodologies. For designers, it would be game pillars or design razors that can sort of accurately describe your game. For an artist, an art Bible. And basically, really, like, games are inherently subjective and emotional and things like that. But making your game shouldn't be. It shouldn't be on the team to guess exactly what's in and what's out, and you need to provide them with the tools to make sure that they can make those decisions correctly, which is where the autonomy comes into it. So all this stuff, the goals and the alignment tools, really help towards proper reviews and critiques. This is like a key stage and definitely worth taking seriously. I think sometimes in a review, people can be left like on a limb and not really know what they need to do next. But providing goals and alignment tools and things like that can give you a great measure for success. And you can say, oh yeah, look, we've actually achieved this because we have a metric for that, rather than just sort of basing it on like opinion or just like the emotion that someone's kind of feeling that day. And I think we've all sat in a review somewhere where someone's had a bad day and reviewed the work badly. Lastly, the outcome of a review should always end up in a place where you know the next steps. The next steps could be wrap it up, move on to something new. It could be, look, we've generated a couple of tasks that needs to be done before you finish that off, or just scrap this all together and move on. But definitely don't leave your team hanging. Often at the end of a review, I like to just ask everyone what you're doing next. What are you up to? Because that can just catch those little miscommunications of like, oh, I thought you said this instead of that. And that can be a really good way to just catch those. So now we've ended up in like a very similar diagram, but this is, we know the clear purpose of each step, and we know how to be successful at each step. So you want to communicate your goal, and then be able to trust your team to do the right thing, which gives you a bit more time and space to do the rest of the things that you're going to need to do as a lead. And then you can come back and you have a great measurement for success with your goal and your alignment tools. There's obviously a lot of nuance in this kind of like loop, but hopefully that kind of like gives a bit more of a concrete sort of why we should be doing this kind of thing. And we do it quite a lot, and it's very useful. So lastly, the really kind of the biggest thing that I've learned from being a lead is how far being a decent human being goes. I would really like to hope that this is easy for everyone in this room, but of course, people are different, not only your team and the individuals there, but you're different too. And it's worth acknowledging that. I referred to this earlier in the talk, but I really hated the way a lot of sort of leadership resources and things referred to people as sort of resources to allocate or robots. And I think it's really important to always consider that you are working with people, and people can have bad days and they can have good days and problems and issues. And that's kind of all just part and parcel of managing people. Again, I think this kind of comes down to a lot of sort of small things. There's not just one thing that's going to make you a more empathetic leader or a nicer person. So this section is a bit more rapid fire, but I've tried to provide some things that I've found important. So first up, be a teacher. This one has like a few benefits, but you're ultimately here so your team can continue to grow and improve, and you're in a position where you have some experience, and passing that on to other team members can be really beneficial for them. And not only them, the side benefit is that your team will grow better too. There's obviously that proverb, which is catch a fish for someone, they'll eat for a day. Teach someone to fish and they'll eat for the rest of their lives, which is quite pertinent here. I think often when fixing issues or solving problems, it's really easy to say, oh, don't worry, I'll just do that. I'll just grab that. But if you take the time to actually sit down with someone and teach them what went wrong or how to fix that, then the next time they can do it themselves, which ultimately is going to save you a bit of time and give them a bit more autonomy. But obviously not everyone is a great teacher. And I definitely struggle with being in the same headspace as some people on my team. But usually what I just try and focus on is explaining the why. Like, why are we doing things, to give them as much tools as they can to be able to fix that problem next time. Generally, I don't think people learn from sort of just being given lists and how-to guides and things like that. So it's always worth sort of sitting down with someone and going through them, and then encouraging them afterwards to try and do it themselves, because ultimately that's the best way that they're going to figure it out, and they'll have no excuse not to. Another thing to remember is that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay, people have bad days and they have good days. But what it's not okay to do is make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's really why teaching is so important, because you can move on. You don't have to make the same mistakes. You can move on to new mistakes, which ultimately there will be. And often that comes down to just having a bit more care in teaching. It's not always necessarily the person's fault for making mistakes. Check your biases. This is a sensitive issue, and the games industry is ripe with power mismanagement and things like that, and you can, of course, have an entire talk dedicated to it. However, I'm going to take a stance and assume that everyone in this room is a nice person and wants to be a nice person. But even then, there needs to be a conscious effort from you as a leader to treat people equally and fairly. You're obviously more likely to gravitate towards people that you get on with, or people who are similar to you. And then your unconscious bias is going to kick in. You're probably more likely to give them praise or even opportunities that maybe someone else deserves. So I would implore everyone to really go out your way and check yourself on this every time that you make a decision that impacts other people. Try and look as objectively as possible at the situation as you can, and go even further and ask someone who's not similar to you, about their advice and what they would do. Really, it's your utmost responsibility as a lead to do this, and your teammates can be your friends, and that's no problem, but you always have to consider that power equation. You might not be aware of it, but anyone who directly reports to you is definitely aware of it, and that's the danger. Professionalism is there to make people comfortable where they work, and that's not just to make you comfortable and no one else. Like I said, it's a big subject, but I just wanted to say something that, even people with the best intentions, if they're not making effort, can fall flat in this kind of area. On a lighter note, praise goes a long way. Really just be a nice person. It's very easy to focus on the negatives and the critique when you're working on a game. You're looking at it in such detail, but really take time to look at the positives and how much good has been done. Pay close attention to when people are working hard, and acknowledge that. Tell them if they nail it. Tell them if they did a good job, even if it's not perfect. It's easy to forget, but I think it really does go a long way, especially for sort of underappreciated disciplines like QA and UI and audio. On a similar note, communicate to others your team's success. It's really good to always call out your entire team and what they've done. It's a nice morale boost to be name dropped, but please don't forget anyone. It can feel really bad if you're continuously left off the list. So take extra care before you drop that Slack message. Definitely don't take the credit for what your team has done. I think if you're in a leadership role because you want the kudos, then you might not be in the right place. Usually or always, it's better to undersell the work that you've personally done to allow your team to shine. And because praise often gets defaulted to you as a lead when your team is doing well, and really you should be able to share that out to them. But I do think it's healthy for other members of your studio to know your team's success. And you don't want to go into like bragging, but it can inspire people. And it can boost morale when they see another team doing well and kind of make them strive to also do a good job. And really, remember, if your team is successful, then you're going to be successful too. One last thing, a good thing to do is to check in with your team individually quite regularly. Not everyone shouts when they have a problem, or generally they don't seek help from others. And I think there's a thin line between suffering in silence and trying to do something for themselves. So checking in with someone can really make sure that they're not sort of spiraling and unable to do their job. And that includes sort of a professional level, but also from a personal level. Check in with them if they're doing all right as a person too. Because lots of people won't want to bother you. As a lead, you'll always have that sort of facade that you are really busy all the time. And that might be true. But people are very happy to reply when you've sort of sent them a message. Again, don't really fall into sort of the micromanagement of like pestering everyone. A simple kind of what are you up to? Do you need anything from me? Can go a long way for some people. Quick Slack message. I also take this time usually to gauge how people feel about the game in general and sort of uncover any hidden work that can be done. It can just help when they're kind of on the ground and kind of thinking about more of the details that you can kind of uncover stuff that you may not have thought of. And they sometimes have better perspectives on the game than you can when you're trying to think of everything all at once. And then lastly, really just be honest with your team. Most people can smell half-truths from a mile away, and trust goes both ways. If you're willing to be honest with your team, then they're more likely to be honest with you. Which can solve a lot of miscommunications. You're always going to be privy to information that maybe the team can't know, but I think there is a problem if you're constantly having to lie to your team, and maybe that's a bigger issue. One of the biggest ways to be honest with your team that I've found is actually just admitting that you don't know something. That's okay. Just because you're a lead doesn't mean you have to have all the answers all the time, and being able to say, I don't know, let's figure this out, is usually a way better solution than just lying and making something up on the spot. In that case, it's as long as you provide sort of a pathway out, make sure that, you know, if you don't know the answer, there's a way to get out and a way to figure out what that answer is, because that's kind of your job. Cool. So yeah, there are loads more things that I would love to cram into this talk, but I did only have 40 minutes. So just in summary, lead first, create second, and make sure you find a good balance between those two things. Be able to trust your team and create processes and supporting tools that help them do that. And then be a decent human being and an empathetic leader. Cool. Thank you so much for coming to my talk and listening to something I'm quite passionate about. I will say that Glomade is hiring right now. We have a few key roles. If we have a booth down in the expo tomorrow and Thursday, if you want to come talk to us, feel free to come and talk to me as well. We usually take some speculative applications as well. Cool. I think I have time for some questions. What is the time? Do we have time? 5 minutes. Okay. Well, yeah, we can do some questions.
Hi there. Thank you for your talk. Just a question. Did you ever, in your experience, have someone who's maybe lead someone who's not pulling their weight or has a big ego? And how have you sort of managed that?
Well, there's probably two different problems. Someone not pulling their weight, I think it's easy to blame them. But really, more times than not, you're not actually setting them up to be successful in their role. And you've got to make sure that really, are they in the right place? Are they doing the thing that they want to do? And I think it's worth having, an honest conversation about what they want to do and where they want to be. An ego perspective, I think I haven't come across that too much, to be honest. And I think it's probably best, I'm just pulling this out of my head now, but like, I think when you have a team that all works together, it soon becomes obvious when someone has a massive ego and is doing the wrong thing. And so if your team are working well together, it's hopefully they'll come to a self-realization that they're actually the kind of the sticking point within the team. But like I said, I'm really had to deal with that too much.
Hello. The graphics are really good, by the way.
Those are our Glowmade's little mascot. They're called art barks, but they're very cute.
Just a really quick one. When it can be very good for morale to just be given the goal and you come up with a way of doing it yourself, but it can be quite demoralizing to have to go back to scratch with something. For some of the more junior members, how do you straddle the line of set the goal, but also kind of set what the work is?
Yeah, I think in that case, you need to make sure that the team that has been set the goal has enough members to achieve that. And like, if what you don't want to do is just set a load of junior members off on their own and then they come back, because ultimately they probably won't have the experience to really do the work. So, we always make sure that we have sort of a member of a lead team or someone to guide that through and to be there on the day-to-day. Again, not micromanaging, but make sure there is someone who you can trust to do the work, and that will kind of like guide through that process. That makes sense. One at the front here.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was great. Yeah, I was just wondering, what's your experience like with team members when like the morale is low? Say, for example, in like a heavy overtime period, particularly if they feel like they've already been working like super hard and they feel like the reason they're doing overtime might be from other like teams, departments, or decision from the top, and like either poor planning, production, whatever.
Yeah, often that is the case, where it's an external source that's making your team feel bad or pulling them down. And what you like, I think it's really good to, in those kind of cases, to make sure that your team is as happy as they can be, and to really celebrate their successes. The game might be on fire and stuff like that, but to really sort of like, going back to what I said about praise and things like that, is to like look after your team and the team that you're running. And there obviously can be bigger picture things going on, but really focus on there and kind of like work hard to make sure that they're protected, because that's kind of your role, is you need to make sure that they're protected from those kind of hardships. Yeah, if that makes sense. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling now.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for the presentation. It was really good. Our team's actually hiring for a lead right now. So if you are exploring opportunities, I'm kidding. No, I'm not. But one challenge that we're having is essentially in the remote work era, our team is almost working across like 18 hours. We've got a couple of guys in LA who are, -8. We've got a few people in India who are plus 4.5. And I'm very conscious of our team lead burning out, so I've been trying my best to kind of help them manage their own time.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, if you've come across these type of things before.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like quite an extreme case where you almost need them to be up for 18 hours a day. But I would say, a lot of this talk can help them to balance their time more, like make sure they have processes that sort of protects them as well, that, they have times, reviews and times that their team, that they don't have to be hands-on with their team all the time and check in every now and then, but don't check in all the time because, everyone's an adult and can, work by themselves. So they don't have to be, as long as there's sort of key moments that they can check in, hopefully, then that'll be all right. Okay, I think that we're at time. So thank you very much.